This is In the Loop. I'm Christian Bryant. Tonight, we'll give you a look at how some cities are rethinking police reform and show you exactly what it means to live in the shadow of fossil fuel refineries. And I'm doing it all from an empty newsroom because, 2020. But first, here's what you need to know right now.
If you look at how we've been hit badly. In some respects, we've done very well. However, in other areas of the country, we're now seeing a disturbing surge of infections.
Dr. Anthony Fauci testified in front of Congress today with yet another dire warning about the coronavirus as states begin reopening and putting people in closer contact. The nation's top virus doctor urged caution and reminded lawmakers that we're still in the first wave of the infection. Despite the surge in case numbers, Fauci did double down on his expectation that a vaccine for COVID-19 will be ready by early next year. Voters in 5 states lined up to cast their ballots in primary elections today. New York and Kentucky had previously postponed their primaries because of the pandemic, and I am really sorry about the alliteration. Kentucky is home to one of the most watched races today as the state decides which Democratic candidate will challenge Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. Amy McGrath was thought to be a shoo-in until State Representative Charles Booker saw a late-game surge in popularity as he became an outspoken voice on the law enforcement killings of Breonna Taylor and David McAtee in Louisville. And Rayshard Brooks was laid to rest today at a private funeral at the same church in Atlanta where Martin Luther King Jr. served as co-pastor. Brooks was killed by an officer after an attempted arrest for suspected drunk driving. That officer and another on the scene are facing criminal charges. There's a wide spectrum of voices protesting police violence and demanding anything from more police training to defunding departments to abolishing policing altogether. But within that, there's one broad consensus. Something must be done about policing in America. In this next story, Jamal Andrews takes us to Dallas, Texas to get a look at an alternative to traditional policing.
You've heard the rallying cry.
When I say defund, you say police, defund. Police. Defund. Police.
Defund, dismantle, and abolish the police. But what could this new reality look like? And where should the millions of dollars that are spent on police budgets go?
We need to reconstruct a totally new system of public safety that takes seriously the material and lived conditions of our people all across this country.
Mike McBride is a pastor and activist in California's Bay Area.
We want a defunded policing apparatus, and for a dollar for dollar defunding, we want it put into schools, housing, food programs, basic income for those who are the most impacted in our communities, violence interruption strategies that are public health centered. Those are the things we want.
Cities across the country are reacting to calls to defund. New York's City Council proposed a $1 billion cut to the NYPD's $6 billion budget, the nation's largest and most expensive police department. Defunding legislation is being considered or has passed in Los Angeles, Kansas City, Baltimore, and Salt Lake City. Perhaps most notably in Minneapolis, where George Floyd was killed, the city council pledged to dismantle its police department entirely and replace it with a transformative new model of public safety. And while this is a brand new world for most, some major cities have already implemented programs that minimize or eliminate law enforcement's role in select situations.
We ask police to do a lot, and so they will readily admit that they're not healthcare providers, and that this mental health in particular is a healthcare issue.
Curtis Young runs the Right Care program in Dallas, Texas. Since 2018, his group has partnered with the Dallas Police Department to deliver specialized mental health treatment to 911 emergencies. People with untreated mental illness are 16 times more likely to be killed during a police encounter, and at least 1 in 4 fatal law enforcement encounters involve an individual with serious mental illness.
A police officer, a paramedic, and a social worker in one vehicle and responds to mental health crisis as one unit. So they're not waiting for the social worker to arrive, or they're not waiting for the paramedic to come.
Since January of 2018, the Right Care team has handled more than 6,000 calls, less than 4% of which resulted in an arrest. And in the coverage area where the Right Care team is operating, overall arrests have gone down. Also, quality of life citations for things like disorderly conduct and public intoxication have also dropped in the area where the Right Care team works. And while some view the Right Care team as an alternative to policing, Young believes the program is actually dependent on the Dallas PD.
This program doesn't exist without the police department. We are a partnership with the police department. And that's such an integral piece of it, that we're not just social workers out there going house to house and taking 911 calls ourselves. You know, we have been folded into this system and very much welcomed by the police department.
A similar program in Eugene, Oregon has been around for more than 30 years and responds to about 24,000 calls annually. The Cahoots co-response team says it has never had a serious injury or death that their team was responsible for in its 30 years of operation.
To me, the compromise has to be about the how. It can't be about the what, right? It has to be about the how. We may compromise on how we do some of this stuff, but we can't compromise on the what. And the what is no system should be able to dehumanize people for the sake of public safety.
Jamal Andrus, Newsy, Chicago.
When we're back, we'll look at how one city reformed policing by tearing it all down and then starting from scratch.
We dig a little deeper on the stories of the day to help start making sense of it all.
We're working remotely, but our mission hasn't changed.
Newsy's here for you.
Newsy is here for you.
From our living rooms
and our kitchens.
24/7, focused on facts and not hype.
Be informed.
not influenced.
On this show, we like to hang around the trending column to see what's got people talking. Here are a few of the highlights. Novak Djokovic might be a badass on clay, but COVID-19 doesn't really care if you're a tennis superstar. The world's best male tennis athlete is trending after announcing he has coronavirus. Before the announcement, Djokovic had been pretty outspoken in his COVID carelessness, saying he wouldn't take a vaccine to compete even if it was mandatory. He also took part in matches where stands were packed and players were interacting with each other. That'd be chill if not for, the whole pandemic. Jimmy Kimmel is the latest celebrity to get the hashtag cancel treatment after at least 2 controversies resurfaced online. In the first, the late night host said this during a 2009 interview with Megan Fox, where she describes a cringeworthy experience on the set of a Michael Bay film as a 15-year-old.
Have me dancing underneath a waterfall getting soaking wet. And that...
Perfectly wholesome?
At 15, I was in 10th grade. So that's sort of a microcosm of how Bay's mind works.
Well, that's really a microcosm of how all our minds work. But
after that clip made the rounds, so did several pictures of Kimmel in blackface. Just another reminder that ditch the dark makeup unless you actually have dark skin, guys. It's really simple. Breonna Taylor is trending, and celebrities all over social media have been working to get Taylor's name trending again to raise the profile of the 26-year-old black woman who was killed in her Louisville home after law enforcement issued a no-knock warrant. 1 officer has been fired for the killing, but no officers have been charged. 2012 was a really awful year for Camden, New Jersey. The city had a murder rate 18 times higher than the national average, with only 77,000 residents. And according to the police chief at the time, police officers weren't helping. So he fired everyone and started over. Now the police department is a model for many advocates looking to reform policing in America. Scripps national reporter Elizabeth Ruiz has more.
We'll pass a couple other areas. East Camden is actually an area I grew up in.
Lieutenant Gabriel Rodriguez is a part of the Camden County Police Department, a department that started over from scratch 7 years ago.
We definitely focus on areas where violent crime is most likely to occur.
Back in 2011, then Mayor Dana Red says Camden was confronted with a fiscal and public safety crisis that led them to lay off more than half of the Camden City Police Department.
We were facing a $26 million deficit in fiscal year 11 and looking for ways not only to balance the budget, but certainly to provide for the safety and protection of our citizens.
This would be my barber shop across the street.
Lieutenant Rodriguez was part of those layoffs.
When I was laid off in 2011, I mean, it was a horrible experience. Not to have a job, I was laid off for 10 months.
He wasn't so sure the transition was a good idea, but then he says he saw a culture change. As the new police force was required to be more community-driven, getting out of their vehicles and interacting with the people of Camden.
How you doing? Just want to make sure you're okay. Yeah, okay. It's been no issues, no problems? Yeah. All right. Yeah. Come and see you soon again, okay? Yeah. I received my first thank you in my entire career when I was out on the walking beat as a Camden County Metro police officer. I never heard that before. Thank you for your service.
The process of creating the new model took about 2 years. Red says the city hired a consultant and had conversations with stakeholders and representatives from 19 diverse neighborhoods in Camden. As mayor, her intention was to establish a system that would reduce the number of crime victims and help people feel safe.
Public safety is not just enforcement, it's prevention, it's intervention programs that you have available for children, youth, and families, and it's also reentry programs for individuals that have been formerly incarcerated that are returning home to communities like Camden, New Jersey.
Red says there was a lot of support for the changes, but there was also a lot of pushback, and some residents say they still haven't witnessed major changes with the new system. Like Keith Benson, who was born and raised in the area. He's also the president of the Camden Education Association.
If you're a community police department, you should be required to live where you're serving.
Benson says he'd like to see residency requirements for officers be reestablished. More than 90% of Camden identifies as either Black or Latino, and Benson says he believes the police force should mirror that. Right now, about half the force is white.
So you feel safe? Yeah. We like to hear that.
However, Benson says more needs to be done to have an effective and trustworthy police force. He says going out into the community is part of it, but actually being a friendly member of the community and looking non-threatening is another.
When you recognize, you have access to social media, you see cops killing people, and you see this big gun hanging on this cop's, hip, that at any moment, for whatever reason, they can reach on you. I mean, that makes you feel a certain type of way as a civilian, specifically if you're a person of color in a neighborhood like this.
We're not law enforcement officers, we're public servants. Our job is not just to enforce the law, it's to serve the people. And to see someone murdered by that person that took that oath, it was very sickening and disgusting. And it hurt me as a person, not as an officer, as a person, it really hurt me to see that happen because, I have brown skin, right? That could have been me. I get pulled over by police and get treated a certain way until they find out that I'm an actual police officer.
George Floyd's death has put the topic of police reform in the spotlight.
When it comes to policing and public safety, I really think the world just changed.
David M. Kennedy is a professor of criminal justice at John Jay College and the director of the National Network for Safe Communities. He says he's been paying close attention to the Camden situation for quite a while, and he thinks it's time for other places across the U.S. to consider a change.
People are not going to tolerate the kind of policing that many of them have been having.
Even though former Mayor Dana Red says the restructuring of police was mostly a financial decision, the nation is now looking to it as a potential blueprint for community-based policing.
What Camden did, do you think that would be a good step for Minneapolis moving forward?
If it's going to be legitimate, it has to be welcome and authentic in the eyes of the public.
Kennedy says in order to defund and disband a police department and build something new, law enforcement has to gain people's trust.
Institutions that have done harm, they need to engage with those who have been harmed in a way that those harmed people find authentic.
Lieutenant Rodriguez says he believes in the system they've created in Camden and hopes police officers all over will work harder to connect with the communities they serve.
We've worked so hard with the community, and when something so unfortunate and so terrible happens to, like it did to Mr. Floyd, it really stains the badge.
In Camden, New Jersey, with photojournalist Drew Snadeke, I'm Elizabeth Ruiz reporting.
If you haven't hit us up on Twitter, now's a good time. Hashtag Newsy in the loop. I don't know how long this ad break is, but go ahead and get those tweets off before we're back.
Sure. Memes and cat videos are fun, but actual news might be a bit more useful. Follow Newsy on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to get straightforward, opinion-free news right on your social news feed.
It's no secret that oil and gas production are a huge source of air pollution, and sometimes that pollution is produced dangerously close to where people live. That's the case all along the Gulf Coast, where Black and brown communities have been living in the shadow of fossil fuel refineries for years and have paid the price with their health. Our Newsy documentary Blowout visited one of those communities. Here's an excerpt.
See that? Look at that. Don't that look good?
That looks great.
Very tasty.
So you grew up in Port Arthur?
Grew up here. Born and raised right here in Port Arthur. Grew up going crabbing. I remember what it smelled like here. It always smelled like rotten eggs, you know, the odors.
So you grew up with those emissions, with that rotten egg smell.
Mm-hmm. But we didn't think twice about it because it was just a norm. When I came back from back home from the military after I got out in 1984, downtown Port Arthur was dilapidated. We had white flight out of Port Arthur, I think, in the late 70s.
Did you notice something was off when you saw people with cancer, when you saw people with respiratory problems?
Well, yeah. Once I met Mr. Alfred Dominique and I went to a couple of meetings he had invited me to that was dealing with environmental justice. He said, well, these plastics are dumping into the air. It's impacting our air quality. It's killing us because they're dumping sulfur dioxide in the air. They're dumping benzene. And I told him, I said, well, I always knew that, you know, it stunk. It didn't smell good. I said, but I didn't know, you know, just how bad it was. He said, yeah, what you smell is poison. So you telling me that benzene is a carcinogen, 1,3-butadiene is a carcinogen, and yet it's all in our air in tons every day. All right, we're gonna go ahead and hook it up now. All right. What's the one that goes inside? This one, you got it? Every chemical has a fingerprint, and the computer that it's hooked up to is able to identify exactly what that particle is and how many parts per million is coming through that light at any given time. Ordinarily, what we would pick up on the UV hound, is sulfur dioxide, that's always a big one. Benzene, which is a known carcinogen. This helped me to raise the alarm and show that we at least have a problem whenever I'm able to pick up some readings, and then it puts the state into high gear to come and either prove me right or prove me wrong. That's Prince Hall Housing Project.
And just a few hundred feet behind us, Industry Row.
Right.
Here. I mean,
thousands and thousands of barrels of oil per day have been produced there since the 60s.
And this refinery is one of the biggest.
That is the largest oil refinery in the Northern Hemisphere, Motiva. Once that bitumen is processed here, it's processed to be sent overseas. It's not processed here to benefit U.S. citizens whatsoever. Many of the people in this area are moderate to low income, and that's rightfully so, because there's not a lot of folks that want to live next to oil and gas productions, because it stinks, it's not healthy, and we all know it. If you're going to have clean burning gasoline, and the only way you get gasoline is from crude oil, all the impurities that came out of that crude oil has to go somewhere. We're the sacrifice zone. Those impurities are going into my air, my grandkids' air, my grandmother's air, and everybody in this town. Port Arthur, Texas is considered the sacrifice zone.
That whole documentary, Blowout, is available to stream on Amazon Prime, so check it out. Not like now, because give me a few more minutes, but at some point.
We're the ones that created this mess, and we're passing it on to our kids. And they're going to look at us one day and say, what the hell are you thinking about? What was you thinking about?
DC statehood is a sensitive subject in the nation's capital. As evidence, I present to you the world's most passive-aggressive license plate message: taxation without representation. And it's true. Statehood has been a goal for DC residents, including in recent protests for racial justice in Washington. This week, the House of Representatives are expected to vote on DC statehood again for the first time in nearly 20 years. Newsy's Nathaniel Reed has more.
It's the slogan on license plates throughout Washington, D.C. End taxation without representation. District of Columbia residents pay federal income taxes, but with only a non-voting delegate to the House of Representatives, they have no real vote in Congress.
People see me on the House floor. Many Americans assume I have the same rights as their own representatives. But if they think about it, they won't see me on that final vote on the House floor.
Washington, D.C.'s non-voting representative to Congress, Delegate Eleanor Holmes Norton, first brought a bill to make D.C. its own state up for a vote in 1993.
The bill is not passed.
It failed, and she has introduced it every year since. This Friday, the bill will come up for a full House vote for the first time in nearly 20 years.
I have virtually all the Democrats as co-sponsors. Not only will vote for the bill, but as co-sponsors.
Republicans have long opposed D.C. statehood. One reason, the district's 2 senators and 1 representative are all but certain to be Democrats. Some legal experts say any such bill would be unconstitutional, and statehood could only be achieved by a constitutional amendment.
My concern here is that if this is to be done, it be done in a constitutional way. The framers set it up this way for a particular reason. They did not want any single state to be overly influential on the federal government for practical reasons.
Democrats in Washington have long called for the district to become the 51st state, allowing the district's leadership more control over the city. The issue came to a head earlier this month when President Trump deployed federal police in response to protests over the death of George Floyd. The bill would leave all federal buildings and monuments out of the new state and under direct control of the federal government.
All of the central federal enclave would continue to be part of the federal government, and that would be the seat of government as required by the Constitution.
The statehood law is widely expected to pass the House with support from Democrats alone, and then to die in the Republican-held Senate.
There's no other way to make the capital city equal unless you make it a state.
Nathaniel Reed, Newsy, Washington.
That's it for us, gang. Join us for more In the Loop tomorrow, same time, same place, but don't go anywhere just yet. More top stories from Newsy are headed your way now.